This is Around the A, a weekly look at the top stories, news, and interviews from the NHL's top developmental league, with your hosts David Foote and Patrick Williams on the Sports Podcasting Network.
It's episode 24 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network as this extended COVID-19 enforced offseason continues. David Foote and Patrick Williams back with you for another week. And Pat, unlike the last probably 3 or 4 weeks since we returned, not a whole lot of news to chat about during the course of the show, but still have some pretty good guests lined up here this week.
Yeah, we have a league MVP and we have one of the top coaches in the league. So despite the fact, like you said, the news cycle right now is slim at best, and that's probably being generous. We still managed to come up with I think a pretty great list of guests today for episode 24.
We're also going to get through the results of round 2 of our Around the A What If the AHL Followed the NHL Return to Play fan poll. Some interesting results coming from that. We'll also tee up the round 3 matchups that you'll be able to vote on our Twitter at Around the A Pod. And we'll also talk about some roster moves, because while the teams haven't been overly busy, some players have, and deciding to change course and make a different path for themselves outside of the American Hockey League. Some prospect news coming out of the LA organization as well. So all that to talk about coming up here later on in the show. But first, last week we spoke to the reigning outstanding rookie in the American Hockey League in Josh Norris from the Belleville Senators, and this week we get the most valuable player, the Les Cunningham Award winner, Gerry Mayhew from the Iowa Wild. 39-goal season for him, Pat, tied for third in the league in points, 61 in just 49 games. What more can we say about the incredible campaign that Gerry Mayhew put together?
And he did all that in 49 games. I think that's really the amazing thing. He had a fantastic year. 39 goals. Also got his first real extended look in the NHL. Made his debut, then played 13 games. Scored twice up with the Minnesota Wild. So a big year for him. A big year really for the entire Iowa Wild club. That was a team as good as the Milwaukee Admirals were all season. I think Iowa could give them a real run for their money. So Gerry Mayhew really, I think, played himself into a consideration with the Minnesota Wild going into next season. He was at one point very much on pace to hit the 50-goal mark, which in this league is extremely difficult. Hasn't happened since 2010. And were it not for that recall, as well as obviously the season being canceled, I really think he had an excellent chance to do that, but wasn't meant to be. But he'll explain his whole season to us in a little bit.
One of those guys who's certainly on the cusp of a permanent place in the National Hockey League if the performance keeps up. And again, not a whole lot of headlines this week, but some great interviews on the way, starting with the new Les Cunningham Award winner, the American Hockey League's most valuable player, Gerry Mayhew from the Iowa Wild, joins us next on episode 24 of Around the A.
Right wing boards. Down low, Rowell. Wraparound try. Rebound. They score! It's Mayhew again!
Thanks for doing this, Gerry. Appreciate the time. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
What's the reaction to winning essentially the league's most prestigious individual award based on your performance and votes from players, coaches, and media from around the league?
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. When I got the call, it was an exciting time for me, and it's an honor. You see some great names on the list of that award, and it's just you got to give some credit to your team this year, and we had a great team, and we had depth. When we have good depth, it's better for you, and so you don't have to pressure's on you, and you can feed off of your teammates' energy and stuff like that. So it was a great honor.
Obviously, the goal every season is to put up the best numbers that you can. Was there a point though this year that you kind of realized things were going real well and that you guys were hitting your stride?
Yeah, definitely. We had a great this year, and we had the guys coming up from the East Coast, contributed a ton, and it's just when you have good goalies and good coaching staff and stuff like that, it's a special thing. It doesn't come around too often. So I think toward the middle of the season, we just saw a record, and we're a good team. So again, it's a bummer that we couldn't finish and make a run for the Calder Cup.
Gerry, what do you maybe consider your best strength on the ice? Especially when you're really on top of your game.
I think just my vision and my grit. Being a smaller guy, kind of more gritty. To win the puck battles and stuff like that. But and I think on the power play, the bumper, I've gotten used to that and playing that for a couple of years, and I'm just getting more comfortable with that spot in the power play. Just overall experience in the game is helping a lot.
And if you had to come up with a scouting report for yourself, how would you describe yourself as a player? And what has your evolution been like from the time you turned pro, coming out of Ferris State, to where you are right now?
Yeah, I think each year, you kind of adapt to the level of play, and I think that I've done that to a pretty good amount here. Each year, I just try to work as hard as I can, and just to get better, and faster, stronger, and there's always room for improvement. So you just gotta keep going, and just hope to be one of the best in the NHL at one point. That's the ultimate goal.
What was that adjustment coming in from the college game? What was the biggest issues that you found, especially like you said, as a smaller player?
I just think the speed was a lot more crisp. The speed, they're bigger, more experienced. The game's a little different. You're wearing a half shield, you're not wearing a full face mask, so it's not like just everyone's running around trying to kill each other. It's kind of more positioned hockey. So I think that was the biggest change for me playing in my first season.
Chatting with the AHL's most valuable player, Gerry Mayhew from the Iowa Wild. You made your NHL debut with Minnesota this season as well, a couple of goals in 13 games. What was it like to make that debut in the National Hockey League, and what do you remember most about that first game or those first handfuls of games?
Yeah, that was a pretty special moment for me. I had a lot of family and friends there who drove from all over, and it was just kind of a surreal experience for me playing against Toronto, an original team. I grew up being a Red Wings fan, so it was pretty cool to play against a team like Toronto, and lucky enough to score my first goal, even though there was, I think, 2 minutes left and we were down 4-1. So,
you started your pro career on an AHL contract, and here you are a couple seasons later playing in the National Hockey League for 13 games. What was that experience like, I guess, growing from the point where you signed that deal? How nice of a feeling is it to have that hard work pay off?
Yeah, I remember that was one of the better days for me. It was pretty exciting signing that contract, and coming from undrafted in the USHL to all 4 years in college and coming in and only having an American League contract. It was a pretty special moment for me, and I'll never forget that day.
You had some real success this season, especially playing with Sam Annis, leading scorer in the league, Nico Sturm. Why do you think you worked so well with those guys? What do they bring to the ice?
Yeah, well, Sturmy, he's a fast kid. He works really hard, and he went to the dirty areas, and he's pretty good in the draw. So, when we start with the puck, you do a lot better than when you're chasing the puck. So I think that's what he brought to the table. And, Sam Annis and me have been playing together for 3 years now. Yeah. And, we've been on the power play together, and we've been line mates together. So I think it's just the chemistry from the start just took off, and now we kind of know where each other are on the ice. And, we just find each other out there, and it just seems to be working. And, it's a bummer we couldn't finish it because, it's his last, it was his last year on his contract. So I'm hoping he signs back. So, but, you don't know what he's going to do.
What has Coach Tim Army done for your game as you've moved through the Iowa system the last few years?
He's a great coach. He loves the game. He loves the game of hockey, and we'll watch video and we'll talk one-on-one. He'll talk with the team. Practices, they're high intensity, and we've just bought into what he wants us to do, and it seems to be working. We've won a lot of hockey games these past 2 years. And, when you're winning, it's a lot more fun. So the atmosphere in the room is pretty good.
Obviously, down here in the American League, you're a first line top scorer. To stick in the NHL full time, do you think you'll have to play a different role? And if so, do you think you're up for that challenge?
I don't know what they would want me to do when I go up, and I played on the fourth line when I was up. I played on the first line when I was up. So I think wherever they want me to play, I think I can adjust to and do well for them. So I'm not really too worried about playing on the first line or playing on the fourth line. Just trying to get out there and do my best and help the team when the ultimate goal is Stanley Cup.
Take a few more minutes here with Gerry Mayhew, the Les Cunningham Award winner, the AHL's most valuable player this season. You mentioned playing with Sam Annis for a while, and given that this award is voted on, as we mentioned earlier, by players, coaches, and media, any bragging rights with your line mate there as to picking up that award? Because we suspect that it was likely a pretty close vote between the two of you.
Yeah, no, he gives me some crap about only being second team All-Star, so he gives me that a little bit. But no, he's definitely deserving of the award too. If it probably came down to the wire. He's had a couple great years, and he's an unbelievable hockey player, and he just sees the ice so well, and he's a great friend to me. And he was one of the first people to text me when they announced it.
What's it like playing in Des Moines? How much of a hockey town is it for those AHL fans who might not be familiar with the market there? Oh yeah, definitely. I've seen the fan base grow the last 3 years, and it's insane. That community is amazing, and you just see these people coming to the games, and how much support they have toward the team, and that helps us. That we feed off that during the games, and they back us up all the time. And when you're going out for an American League game and you see that stadium filled, it's pretty fun to play in, and hope continue that and we can actually finish the season and make a run for the Calder Cup. You mentioned it right off the top there. Disappointing to say the least to not get a chance to finish off this season. How disappointing is that to not get that chance to contend for a Calder Cup with what was a very strong group there in Iowa? Yeah, it's disappointing. Obviously, no one wanted this to happen. And, when you have such a good team like this, you really want to make a run for it. You don't come around these teams very often. You could be on a lot of bad teams in your career, but when you're on a good one, you really want to make the most of it. But I was lucky enough to have two really good teams over the past 2 years. So hopefully this continues and we just keep building and see what we can do in the next couple of years. You mentioned Sam giving you a bit of a hard time over being a second-team All-Star, yet being the MVP. Have you gotten an explanation from anybody with the league or anywhere else how someone can be a second-team All-Star but still be the MVP of the entire league? No, but I did. Someone did a statistic on it, and I think they said that it's only been since the 1950s. There's only been like 5 people who have got second team and MVP. So I don't really know what happened. I mean, I think maybe because we had so many guys in the first team from Iowa, they didn't want to put a whole team of Iowa. I don't know. I really don't. I don't know what happened, but it's still a great accomplishment, and Reed Boucher definitely deserves that. He had a great year this year, so you can't take anything away from him. Last season, you guys played Milwaukee in the playoffs. You had a big playoff last season. What did you see from that Milwaukee team this year? They were obviously first in the league, but you were giving them a pretty good run for their money as well. Yeah, they had a great coaching staff. They had 2 great goaltenders, and they just played as a team. They were really hard to play against. They were great defensively.
and they scored. They like to score goals too. So when you put all that together, you have a pretty legit team. And we've always had battles with them. And even last year, I think we won 2 games at home, but big. And then we went there. They beat us twice, and it was down to the wire. And we kind of got a fluky goal and won. So it could have went either way. So they're a tough team to play against, definitely. And it's a tough building to play in.
Last thing, just with the NHL's announcing their return to play, what does your summer look like? And how do you map out a training program, not entirely knowing what's ahead, both for the NHL, if they actually end up playing, and then also for next season as well? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to work out just like the season didn't even shut off, and I've been rollerblading. There's ice in Sylvania, Ohio, which is only an hour away from where I am in Michigan. So I'm thinking about getting down there and skating a couple times, but it's definitely crazy. It's going to be an adjustment for everyone, and I'm kind of excited to see what's going to happen with this 2014 playoff with no fans. It's going to be interesting.
If the AHL had decided to play without fans, how would you feel about that?
It would have been great. Back with the boys in Iowa, and still, it'd been a little different, but I think it would have been great to finish it out. We only had, 13 games left. I think I would have enjoyed that a great amount.
Yeah, it's disappointing for sure, but a heck of a season again for Gerry Mayhew, the Les Cunningham Award winner, the AHL's most valuable player. Congratulations again, man, and thanks for this.
Yeah, thank you guys.
To Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, episode 24 with myself, David Foote, partner Patrick Williams. Glad to have you with us. Big thanks to Gerry Mayhew for his time, the Les Cunningham Award winner as the AHL's most valuable player, and in pretty much the same spot, Pat, as everybody else when it comes to handling this ongoing situation nobody really knows what's going on or how to prepare for the future or the return to play when it comes. Everybody's just kind of taking it a day at a time and seeing how things develop.
Well, yeah, that's a great point. And, you look at a guy like Gerry Mayhew, his value and, in terms of his career, he's at his peak right now in terms of being able to really have a good shot to make the Minnesota Wild next season, possibly have an opportunity to be on the taxi squad if and when the NHL does resume play in the summer. And yet there's no way to really truly adequately prepare for it. You don't know what your training is. You haven't been on the ice in a lot of cases for 3 months. We all know in hockey, player career momentum is a very, very delicate thing, and you can be high one moment and the next month your stock is down again. So for a player like Gerry Mayhew, his teammate Sam Ennis, this is the time they have to capitalize, and yet there's a lot working against them right now. So I think for players like that, this is a big challenge. It's really going to be interesting to see who's able to handle it and who's not. And, you just feel bad for a player like him. You work to get to this point, and then all this situation happens, and now he has that much more of an obstacle to reach the NHL. So the next 3 to 6 months are going to be very telling for a lot of players, and I won't be surprised when all's said and done if a number of players around the American League and elsewhere don't return to action. This could mean, just like in the 2005 lockout, a lot of players' careers are over. So it's going to be very telling seeing where this goes, and like I said, seeing how players are able to handle it.
And we'll talk a little bit more about how coaches are handling this extended break with the head coach of the Belleville Senators, Troy Mann, who will join us in a few minutes to talk about an incredible season in his second year behind the bench here with the Senators, and how he is getting through this situation. And we're looking forward to that coming up in a few minutes. you talk about players leaving the league or potentially for some the game in general if they're at that later stage of their career path. There's been a number of player moves over the last week or so in the American Hockey League, including here in Belleville with defenseman Frank Corrado deciding to head overseas and go to Europe. The former OHL exceptional player Sean Day has been released by the New York Rangers, and there's a couple other guys who are on the move to Europe as well. Do you think the guys are seeing maybe a brighter light at the end of the tunnel overseas in how things are being dealt with, or what do you attribute guys making these decisions in relative terms so early in this long offseason to move on?
Well, that's a great question because Europe, by all indications, is a little bit further along in terms of handling the current pandemic, which therefore means the leagues over there are a little bit closer to handling and returning to play. And if you're a player, you're looking at the landscape here. You're not sure if and when the next season will begin. And there's a good chance, let's be honest, that it may not happen next year. I mean, if we get another wave of this, if you're already looking at a January start, it wouldn't take a whole lot to push that back another month or two and really make a season not feasible. So sure. It's one of those situations where if you have an opportunity and you're a player, I would highly recommend you seriously consider taking that opportunity. Go over to Europe, kind of get a sure thing, or at least a sure thing as there is these days, and go from there. I mean, I understand the temptation for players to give it one more year. You always hear players saying that on the NHL ambitions, but at some point, you really do have to kind of make a dollars and cents decision. And if the KHL or Sweden or someone like that comes knocking, I think you have to seriously consider it because you just don't know what the landscape is going to be here for players. We don't even know when free agency is going to start. So much it depends on how the NHL manages the next few months and if they're actually able to return to play. And if they are you looking at a October, November free agency? If you are at that point, what's the market going to look like? Are all 31 teams going to be playing next year? If so, what will the veteran rule look like? Will teams have to double up? Maybe will there be split affiliations? Who knows? There's a lot of real difficult situations without a lot of precedent players have to work through. And you can see players like Chris Weidman, Lawrence Pilut, Justin Kloos, Frank Corrado. They're taking the sure thing rather than holding out hope for a maybe. So this is going to be a big story the next number of months at the American League level.
Yeah, it sure is. And I mean, you mentioned a few names there, and at least one of those I found real surprising, that Lawrence Pilut was going to head overseas. That's a top prospect in that Rochester and Buffalo system, and a guy who perhaps I think felt that he wasn't getting a fair shake at the NHL level, and like you said, saw a better opportunity and decided to move on.
Yeah, 2-year deal over in the KHL with Chelyabinsk. Like you said, a real solid prospect came over, and he certainly did a lot of good things for the Rochester Americans. Got a little bit of a look in Buffalo, but not a full-time look, and that whole Buffalo team right now is in such a state of flux. You have Jack Eichel displeased with his situation there and everything running there. A lot of pressure on Jason Botterill, the general manager of Buffalo. So Lawrence Pilut, again, taking a sure thing. 2-year deal, go over there, make some good money. If you're a player, you're making $500,000, maybe $1 million, depending on your deal. It's hard to turn that down. So he's gone. It's a big loss for Buffalo, at least in terms of depth.
What about Peter Stojko in Manitoba, the captain there?
Yeah, Peter Stojko played parts of 6 seasons with Winnipeg. He was actually the last draft pick in Atlanta Thrashers history back in 2010. A Winnipeg native, so that was a big deal for him when the Thrashers became the Jets. Captain of the Manitoba Moose, always represented the club well, but he ran into some concussion issues the last number of years, and he's a really bright guy, and at this stage of his career, 28 years old, I think he saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, and decided to get out while he still was able to, with his health intact for the most part, and whatever he does, he'll be successful at it. He's one of those types. But it's always sad to see a player have to retire when it's not of his own volition. And unfortunately, concussions again just come up as an issue. And, it just goes to show you it's not even the fighters that have to deal with the concussion issue. I mean, Stojko he was by no means an enforcer. So just a real steady stay-at-home defenseman type. And once we've heard this time and time again. Once you get a couple concussions, the next ones that you get are even more severe. So I think a good decision on his part. But obviously, even though it's the right decision, it's still difficult when you finally do.
All right, one more player I want to touch on before we get to a quick prospect note from the LA Kings organization, and then our round 2 results from our Around the A playoff predictor poll as well. And that's Sean Day, who had earned exceptional status into the Ontario Hockey League as a 15-year-old and never really panned out to where he was expected to be at. A couple of mediocre seasons between Hartford and Maine, AHL, ECHL, and the Rangers organization has just decided that it's not going to be worth it.
Yeah, 22 years old. He's had a really interesting, I think, career path would be a nice way to put it. Like you said, an exceptional player. So comes in at 15, and that's obviously a very, very select group. You think of the players that have been able to do that, Connor McDavid, John Tavares, Shane Wright right now with Kingston. So a very small group, and he was one of them, and just never worked out for him. He bounced around a bit in junior, but did manage to become a third-round pick by New York in 2016, but just never came together for him in Hartford. That was a team with a lot of issues in general. Last season, they really struggled badly. Cleaned house of all their veteran players mid-season. So a player like him is kind of lost in the shuffle, didn't adapt well to the pro game. And then this year was a little bit more of the same on that up and down roller coaster. It was a much better blue line this year. So he was kind of pushed out of the picture, now 22 years old. And when your NHL club buys you out of the last year of your entry-level deal, that, for me is a very bad sign for a player's career prospects. And he's going to have to really do some digging here to get his career back on track. Not to say he can't. It's been done before, but he's definitely in a tough spot right now.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, while you have one player not going to finish his entry-level deal, 2 players in the LA organization have been officially signed to their entry-level deals. 2 picks from 2019. That's Arthur Kaliev and Jordan Spence. Kaliev, who played with the Hamilton Bulldogs of the Ontario Hockey League for the past 3 seasons, a World Junior participant for Team USA, and then Spence, who was with the Moncton Wildcats of the Quebec League and had a pretty good season there. Again, early in this long offseason, but nice for these young guys to lock up deals at least and be able to start preparing to likely make their pro debuts next season.
Yeah, last week we had John Hoven, the mayor, on to discuss the Ontario Reign / LA Kings. And the big story in LA the last year or two has just been the deep prospect base that they built. And Kaliev is the latest one, 33rd overall pick last year. 44 goals this past season with Hamilton, 98 points, runner-up as OHL outstanding player. Another guy that they're able to plug in there, Rasmus Kupari, obviously, is one of their real encouraging prospects. Gabe Velarde has battled back from back issues, had a really nice bounce-back season. And then Spence, named top blue liner in the QMJHL. Played, like you said, playing for Moncton, 52 points, 60 games. He was a 4th-round pick, looking like a nice bargain at the moment. So they're going to have a new head coach in Ontario and just an influx of young players. I think if you're the LA Kings, if you're a fan of that club, you really have to be excited by some of the talent that's coming in there because they've had some tough years at the NHL level, but they've really nicely replenished the prospect list and give these guys a couple years, but I think LA is going to bounce back in a major way.
All right, let's move on. This is episode 24 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network with David Foote and Patrick Williams. Coming up in just a few minutes, the head coach of the Belleville Senators, Troy Mann, joins us again for his second appearance on the program this season. But before we get to Troy, we have to get into the results of round 2 of our Around the A playoff fan poll. If you are new to the program and aren't following us on the social medias at Around the A Pod, first of all, we suggest you do. Second of all, we'll recap for you what we're doing. We decided with a lack of Calder Cup playoff hockey this year, we would put it to the fans to decide who they think would win the Calder Cup if the American Hockey League had decided to follow the NHL's return to play format. And we worked through the qualification round, if you will, and we're through the first best-of-7 series round, and we've got some results, and we can tell you that in the Eastern Conference, the Belleville Senators, who were the number 1 seed after that qualification round, have defeated the Syracuse Crunch by earning 87.9% of the fan vote. The number 2 seed Providence Bruins beat number 7 Hartford with 77.4% of the vote. The number 3 Hershey Bears get past the defending Calder Cup champion Charlotte Checkers with 52% of the vote, and the Utica Comets at number 5 just edge out their divisional rivals in Rochester with 54% of the vote. We'll give you the matchups for round 3 in just a moment. Milwaukee, Iowa, Tucson, Colorado, the top 4 seeds in the West all moved on fairly easily as well, all getting inside 60% or so of the vote in those fan polls. We thought the fans were pretty much on the nose in round 1. How do you think they did in round 2?
Yeah, interesting. I thought Syracuse would put up a little bit better fight. Obviously, Belleville, number 1 seed, very impressive year. Syracuse was a little bit up and down this year, but definitely some talent in that lineup. Hershey, like you said, knocking out the defending Cup champs. A real good battle there. Hershey, I thought, in a lot of ways, was a very under-the-radar club this year. They didn't necessarily get a ton of attention. They didn't have a ton of top prospects putting up big numbers, but a very well-coached club, and I think the fans saw some of that in there. And then, like you said, the Utica Comets, they were a qualifier team. They got past Wilkes-Barre in the first round, or that qualifying round, now past Rochester, and set themselves up for a meeting with the Belleville Sens. So a real good, interesting Final Four, if you will, from the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and those matchups look like this. Number 1 Belleville against number 5 Utica. Number 2 Providence against number 3 Hershey in the East, and then in the West, number 1 Milwaukee against number 4 Colorado, and number 2 Iowa against number 3 Tucson. I took the liberty of logging on to the AHL Media Access site and taking a look at the head-to-head records of these teams over the last 5 years. And here's how I see the advantage going based on those numbers. Belleville has a 10-8 record against Utica over the last 5 years, so you'd have to, give them the nod there. The Providence Bruins are 18-9-1-2 against Hershey over the last 5 years. But in the West, it's actually the low seeds who have the advantage there. Colorado's only played Milwaukee 4 times in 5 years and has beaten them 3 of those times. And Tucson and Iowa have played 12 times in the last 5 years, with Tucson winning 11 of those. Of course, none of that really means anything because it's up to the fans, but interesting to take a look at, to say the least, if you want to look at franchise histories and maybe have that weigh into your voting a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I thought Colorado, they were much better than a 4 seed all season. A lot of ways I thought they could make a real push. And Milwaukee, as good as they've been this year, get a pretty difficult opponent here for only the second round, having to play the Colorado Eagles. And then, like you said, Tucson, Iowa. I mean, Tucson, just a well-coached, well-balanced club. Iowa obviously has a lot of that high-end offensive talent, but also have Capo Kakinen in net, and so a real good matchup there. And as you said, Tucson's had the major advantage in the season, or I should say, the head-to-head matchup. In the end, I mean, it really comes down to fans. Now, hopefully, fans, I'll say, hopefully they're looking at this from a hockey standpoint, not so much rooting interest. We'll assume they are. But it's a real good Final Four out west as well, and it's going to set up some good matchups here, and eventually you get to the conference final in the next round, and really I could see any of the final 8 clubs survive until that round and making a good push.
It'll be fun to see what happens again. We'd like you to vote, so head over to @AroundTheA-Pod on Twitter and cast your vote, and we'll have the results for you in episode 25 next week and set up the conference finals in our What If AHL playoff fan poll. The what if question has been swirling around the mind of our next guest, I would imagine, since the season ended. The Belleville Senators had a record year in their franchise history, their short franchise history, ending up amongst the top teams in not just the Eastern Conference, but the league. Belleville was the highest scoring team in the league. They had some of the top young players in the league, including the Rookie of the Year, Josh Norris, and we're going to find out more about the season that could have been and how coaches may be handling this offseason. The head coach of the Belleville Senators, Troy Mann, is going to be with us. Always look forward to a conversation with Troy Mann.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting one. Troy's a longtime coach, 6 seasons as a head coach alone in this league. And for guys like him and everyone in his position around the league, this is a challenging time. You just don't know what to expect. You don't know how to plan. Hockey is such a regimented calendar. Pretty much you can almost plan the season out to the day. And same goes for the offseason. You always have those benchmark dates. Well, now you don't have them. Now you don't really know when the draft officially will be. You don't know when free agency will be. You don't even know if the NHL will be able to finish this season. So you just have so many unknowns and variables to deal with. And that goes double at the American League level, where so much of the business is out of your hands anyway in the best of times. So coaches like Troy and like I said, around the league really have their hands full, and it's going to be a real, I think, telling sign how they handle it, and we'll see who is able to make the best of it. I think is probably the best way to put it when all's said and done, come next January. But I think really all bets are off, and even the most prepared coach in this situation is in a lot of ways flying without any radar right now, because there's just no playbook to draw from.
Yeah, there certainly isn't, but we will see what Troy has to say about what's to come in the months ahead. The head coach of the Belleville Senators, Troy Mann, joins us next on episode 24 of Around the A. Thanks for joining us, Troy. How have the last couple of months been for you since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. It's funny. Our last hockey game was exactly 12 weeks today, so that's 3 months, and that's normally an off season, right? So, with the weather getting nicer and some things kind of opening up a little bit, I guess it has been better recently, but it certainly was a tough stretch there for a few weeks, specifically when you should be playing hockey. This time of year, it's like, hey, if you make the finals, it's fantastic, but most mid-June or June 10th, there's no hockey, right, or very limited teams playing, and so you're kind of looking at it like at the off season. So it's personally, it's gotten a little bit better here recently.
Yeah, and it's must be difficult to, up until that point that the season was actually canceled, to wonder if you're going to go back and how that's all going to start up again. As difficult as it is to have the season canceled, is there a little bit of, almost closure in that sense that you can start to focus on next season now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, from a coaching staff perspective, we waited probably 4 weeks, to, and then, even though there was no announcement, you kind of get that feeling, just based on all the talk that you weren't going to be able to play. So we kind of finalized that year-end routine that we normally go through, with player evaluations and analytical, final analytics and those types of things. And so we did that probably 4 weeks into the pandemic, and We've just recently actually finished our exit meetings. We were waiting on Ottawa, and so we've just recently completed those. So as I was saying prior to going on, this has probably been the biggest or busiest week for me since we stopped playing, with the NHL Coaches Association Global Coaching Seminars or Symposium going on this week, and then we did exit meetings, and so it's kind of nice to be busy for a change.
Yeah, the offseason officially started, but obviously we need to talk a little bit about the success of your club over the course of the season. A fair number of new faces, a lot of young players in the lineup this year, but you managed to get the guys to gel together and become the highest scoring team in the American Hockey League, and as we mentioned off the top of the interview, a favorite in a lot of people's minds to go deep in the Calder Cup playoffs for the first time since the team moved to Belleville. Why was the team able to become so successful, and was there a turning point maybe after the first month or so in the season where you saw things really start to move in the right direction?
Well, I think that when you got a young team, and unless you're following our team closely or our division, most people probably are not even aware that we were the second youngest team in the league. We were actually tied with San Jose. Ontario Reign had the youngest team, and we were tied with San Jose. And like I say, unless you really dissect and get into those type of things, you don't realize that. So, we knew from the onset that it was going to take some time with our young group, and it did. We got off to a slow start. I think we were maybe 2-5-1 or something of that nature. And but once the Norrises and the Formingtons and the Parker Kellys got acclimated to the pro game, I did like some of our off-season signings in terms of leadership. And those guys did a great job as the season progresses of just, letting the young guys be themselves. And, there was no old school approach or nothing of that sort. And they kind of, the room was, became the young guys' room because of the type of talent we had. So, in the exit meetings, there was certainly a lot of positivity with our leadership group in terms of how they'd let the players be themselves. And when I say players, I'm talking the youth of the team, because certainly they were the go-to guys when you look at the scoring and of that nature.
With such a young team, how were you able to get these players, especially some of the younger, more talented players, a night in, night out basis to play two-way game, play on the right side of the puck, and not cheat offensively, and yet still obviously produce 3.71 goals per game?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that the one thing about this group of kids that came in this year was, coaches talk about it all the time about meeting the coach halfway, and that was one of these groups of kids that they met us halfway as coaches, right? And that's, regardless of the talent level of the individual player, that is such a key when they meet you halfway in terms of their development, and obviously buying into the system that's in place and buying into that team game. And, all our guys did that. This was a fabulous group to work with. And, I just finished my 10th year in the American League, and it was just a real fun year to be around such a youthful group and such a group that was willing to learn and want to get better on a game-to-game basis.
With obviously there being no playoffs, what are those young players, especially the prospects, the first, second-year guys, what are they missing not going through that experience?
Yeah, well, Pat, I've been through some pretty good playoff runs myself. And, and you start looking at Washington's roster and what it meant to their Stanley Cup championship in terms of the amount of players that went through some playoff runs. I think it's imperative for the players' development. Now, in saying that, is that going to prevent Drake Batherson from playing in the NHL next year? No, but it is a piece of the puzzle, right? I mean, I've told Drake Batherson that I don't think he has anything left to prove at the AHL level, and his numbers will indicate that. For him to come back to the AHL in 2021 why? To lead the league in scoring or be a top 5 scorer, and no. But in saying that, it would have been nice to see how he would have reacted down the stretch in the last 10 games, jockeying for playoff positioning, and how he would have performed in the playoffs. And he's just one example, right? We have a number of guys, Josh Norris and Alex Formington and Eric Brandstrom. I mean, these are high-end quality prospects that will play in the NHL. And, I don't want to say it's going to hurt their development, but I am a huge proponent of these type of players going through playoffs when there's lots on the line. And I just think it helps their development in the long run.
Which teams do you think, had you met them, would have definitely posed an even more significant challenge than maybe a typical playoff team would pose?
Yeah, well, just looking at our division, which, and every year is different. In the Atlantic, when I was in Hershey, in my opinion, the Atlantic was always stronger than the North. And this year, or even my 2 years in Belleville, the North has certainly been stronger, in my opinion, than in past years. And I look at Rochester. I think they were going to be a tough team. We had some great games with them, and we lost, I think, 3 games in the last 10 minutes of hockey games against that team. Now, they, I believe, were the oldest team in the league in terms of average age, and they were a veteran club, and they had a great mix. But they would have been an interesting matchup for our group. Certainly, and I was looking forward to or hoping that we could at least, the way the standings were working out, that we would potentially meet them in the second round. Not that to say you would get out of the first round, but I was hoping that we would have that matchup against Rochester, certainly in the playoffs. Win or lose, I thought it would have been great for our young club.
Chatting with the head coach of the Belleville Senators, Troy Mann. Coach, you mentioned Drake Batherson there, and him not having much else, if anything at all, to prove at the AHL level. What about guys like Josh Norris and Alex Formington, who put up outstanding seasons in their first year in pro hockey? Do they probably still need to see a little bit of time in the AHL again next season, or do you think one or both of those guys might be NHL ready?
That's a great question, and I don't think it's fair for me to just say they are completely ready for the NHL. I would have liked to have seen both those kids down the stretch and in playoff playing meaningful hockey to further development and see what the potential was in September. But they're certainly as close as they. When you start talking about prospects being NHL ready, they're as close as they get, right? I mean, Alex Formington's purpose and detail improved tremendously from his junior days, and obviously he's got NHL speed already. Josh Norris, this is a great off season for him because he's got all the tools to play in the NHL, and it's going to be interesting his off season in terms of can he get stronger to win those low battles in D-zone coverage against bigger, stronger men, and or in O-zone play, right, when you're battling, right? Those are the type of things you look for in the off season. And again, this is a different type of off season, right? Like, and I know guys are starting to get back into routines with personal trainers and gyms opening up. So he'll probably have plenty of time to get stronger. But those are the questions that are going to be answered, come November, December, for both Formington and Norris.
Were you surprised at how well they were able to play, or how easy it seemed for them to be as successful as they were?
Well, one, Josh Norris, I mean, obviously anytime you have a chance to coach a first-round pick, your expectations are automatically become high. But he was coming off a major surgery and hadn't played a hockey game since the World Junior Championship. So, and he would admit, he was not as sharp as he would have liked in training camp in Ottawa in September. So, there was certainly an adjustment period there, but he's such a great kid and he's so coachable that he just kept getting better and better as the days progressed. And when it comes to, Alex Formington, I think from an offensive perspective, I would have to say that he exceeded our expectations. We knew he was going to be one of the fastest guys, or if not the fastest guy in the AHL, and that he would get plenty of opportunity to score because of his speed. But we started him slowly. He was only a penalty-killing guy to start with the way the roster was configured, and he just started scoring and became a power play guy and really a guy that we used in all situations. And he became very good defensively as well, where, he had 5 to 7 empty net goals because we used to have him on the ice quite a bit, not only because of his speed, but he earned it defensively as well. So, I certainly think from an offensive perspective, he exceeded our expectations and probably the organizations as well, if you talk to the developmental people in management.
There was a lot of development in the crease as well for the Senators this year. Obviously, Marcus Hogberg going up to Ottawa and spending a lot of time there, and Joey Decord and Philip Gustafson having to kind of take the reins here in Belleville. And you've got a couple more prospects in the pipeline coming up now. Obviously, it's too early to make any decisions, but how do you see the goaltending picture shaping up over the next season once we get there?
Well, Marcus Hogberg, if you've looked at his contract, his second year of his contract becomes a one-way. So in my history, anytime an NHL club gives a player a one-way, they're certainly banking on that player playing in the NHL and not the AHL for the most part. So I think Hogberg has certainly earned his stripes in terms of what he was able to accomplish in Ottawa this year, and certainly he was the major reason we were playing for a playoff spot last year on the last day of the season. So, and then you look at our two other prospects with Decord and Gustafson. I mean, let's face it, they pretty much from December 1st, they were our goaltending tandem. I mean, we didn't really have Hogberg for the majority of the season, and those will be our two guys next year. Now, Joey Decord is certainly an older prospect in terms of age, so but he certainly did a great job for us, and there's no way we would have been in first place on March 11th without his play, and I think his numbers indicate that. Now, Gus, obviously at 21 years old, is a little bit younger, and his growth developmental-wise has been a little bit slower, but certainly from an analytics perspective, they're better this year than in year one, and I think that's all you have to look for, right? You want to see progression, and I think that's what we've seen in Gus, and obviously Decord, certainly in my opinion, proved this year that he is certainly a number one goalie at the AHL level and is going to be knocking on the door here at the NHL level soon.
Troy, every coach is going to have a different definition of what a player who's ready, what that actually means. How do you define a player being ready for the NHL?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like, what is the definition? Well, I mean, I think consistency. There's a number of prospects and players that can go to the NHL and do it for 10 games or 15 games, but it's that consistency of the grind of the night in, night out, and bringing your A game or close to your A game on a game-to-game basis. And that's why sometimes you see prospects go up and have success for 3-4 weeks, and then they fall off, and next thing you know, they're back in the American League. So, when you start analyzing prospects, okay, do they have NHL speed? Do they have an NHL shot? Do they have NHL vision? Do they compete on the puck? How well do they play defensively? Those are all questions you ask. But at the end of the day, it's consistency and doing it night in, night out that's going to keep you there for a 10-year period or a 5-year period or a year to year. So, it's nothing new for any organization to see a prospect go up and succeed early and just because of the grind and what it takes on a day-to-day basis, they may not have the maturity level to do that. And every prospect's different, right? Their developmental curve at being consistent is different for each player.
We don't know exactly when the season is going to start. It could be a 3-month variation. How do you map out a training program for each player so that they kind of peak at the right time? They're not overtraining, they're not undertraining. they're ready to go at just the right time.
Yeah, and we certainly talked to all our players individually this past Monday and Tuesday, and that was part of the discussion in the exit meeting. You know, after you talk about the season individually and talk about their strengths, weaknesses, whatever you may talk about during those course of those meetings, it was the off season and the training, and not to peak too early, and because there is so much unknown, right? Specifically with a team like Ottawa and Belleville, Ottawa, let's face it, are not part of the group that's going to play in August, September in the NHL. So what is going to happen to those 17? Will they be able to bring their players in September or early October to have some type of training or practices? Are they going to let the NHL guys like Ottawa and Detroit, are they going to let them sit to December or the end of November when training camp would start for 2021? And it's the same with our prospects. So it's certainly something that our strength and conditioning group will need to manage. And we did discuss that with a number of players these past 2 days because of the unknown. It's just not going to be typically, come into Ottawa at the end of August, early September and get ready for whether it's rookie tournament or a main camp that usually starts around the 15th, 18th of September. I mean, it's not going to happen this year. And even though they haven't announced it, I think we all know that that's not going to be possible.
With a possibly, could be up to 9 months, maybe even longer. How do you keep a player mentally sharp? How do you keep him in that game ready mode where, regardless of what physically, mentally, where will he be at if he doesn't play a game between March and December or next January?
Yeah, it's funny. You talk about players, you talk about coaches as well, right? You're trying to do everything possible to stay sharp, and you're always worried that you're going to lose that edge. And we've already been off 12 weeks, and that's typically an off season, right? Where you're back at it because June, let's face it, for coaches is still pretty busy. You got the draft and developmental camps, and you're talking free agents with your management group, and even that, as much as you talk about players, like you're probably anticipating an off season in October. So when it comes to the players, the same type of thing, right? Like mentally, how do you stay sharp? Because you're not really playing games and you're not allowed contact. For the most part, they're probably not even going to be allowed contact in July and August when they do get back on the ice with their skill development coaches. So, that's certainly something that the players will have to be mindful of. And, in terms of having the answer, I don't think anybody would have the answer in terms of how do you keep a player sharp knowing that you might not play a meaningful hockey game to sometime in December.
You had a long playing career. How would you approach this kind of situation if you were still a player?
Well, certainly I wish I would have had as much knowledge when it comes to training back in my time playing that the players do now. And they all have these, personal trainers, and some have, not only their personal strength and conditioning coach at home where they're training, they're always in contact with the NHL guys. So sometimes you almost have two guys. So, that's something that, it takes discipline, and that would have been an interesting one for me. So probably another question. I'm not quite sure on that answer.
How do you see this affecting free agency with it not knowing when that window will open? How do you start to map out with management the type of players that you might want to see them sign for Belleville next year?
That's certainly something that we're going to be discussing at some point in terms of who potentially is going to be graduating. We certainly want to be competitive. Pierre Dorion and Peter McTavish have certainly made that known to me that it's important that we keep Belleville competitive. So, when you start looking at our roster and thinking of guys like Norris and Batherson and potentially Brant, some of these type of players playing in Ottawa next year, that's some significant talent that could potentially be in the NHL. And those are really, from a prospect perspective, unless you got the same talent coming in, where do you go to find those players that can not necessarily be as good as those players, but bring in the same type of production? Well, it has to go to free agency. So we really haven't had those discussions, Pat, quite yet. But I know that it will be part of the discussions moving forward, and we'll just have to. I think from our side of things, or in terms of the head coach and our coaching staff, we'll have to just see what Ottawa plans to do with their roster, and then certainly help make recommendations. And but the fact that we want to stay competitive and compete for a playoff spot next year, that's certainly good news.
Last thing, if you had to get your crystal ball, what do you see the AHL looking like next year in terms of number of teams playing, when it may start, and what some of the challenges may be for you and your fellow coaches?
Yeah, it's certainly one of those situations where you really hope that all 31 teams will play, and is that possible? I think that's really hard to predict at this stage. You got to pretty much prepare as if you're going to have a start in October, and then all of a sudden, I think the AHL has been very communicative with us in terms of letting us know what the plan is and what the possibilities are. But at the same time, come August, we feel that we'll probably have a great idea by August whether we're going to be able to start on time and what that will look like. And maybe it slips into November and December, and who knows? It might even be a January start, right? I think that's with this pandemic, there's just so much unpredictability and unknown that it's really hard to gauge, how many teams will be able to participate, and are you going to have a regional schedule to start? How about the border crossings, right? Like, are you going to have to play just the Canadian teams to start? Those are all, certainly from my perspective, living in Belleville, that's something that crosses your mind, right? What's the border going to be like come September, October? And, can we travel on a bus to Syracuse, or are we going to need two buses because of the social distancing? And so those are all questions that go through your mind as a coach, and nobody really has any answers. So you try not to think about it because you might drive yourself crazy.
So many questions still to be answered moving forward, but we appreciate you taking some time to answer some for us today, Troy. Troy Mann is the head coach of the Belleville Senators here on Around the A. Thanks again so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Segment here of episode 24 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network. Our thanks to Troy Mann, who is here in Belleville, but of course we're practicing safe physical distancing, and he joined us on the phone from his place up in the north part of town. Interesting to hear from Troy and get his perspective, Pat, but it's kind of funny how everybody around the world of hockey and pretty much everybody we've spoken to is all really kind of on the same page with all of this. And like we were saying before the interview, there's just so much unknown that you can't really predict anything, and you just kind of have to see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing these coaches who usually the challenge for them is to find free time, right? It's such a almost year-round job now. It's not just the season; it's prospect camp, it's the draft, it's free agency, it's drawn up plans for next season. I mean, everything. And now, in a lot of ways, all you have is time. Now, you want to use that time wisely, obviously, but sometimes having too much time can almost lead to the opposite of that, where you always feel like, well, I can just get it done tomorrow. And eventually tomorrow does come. So for coaches like him who are so accustomed to very disciplined time management, I think that's a challenge for him and for really any coach trying to handle, especially the nature of the way the season ended. It was going, and then it stopped overnight, literally, and it hasn't been the same since then. And Troy made a great point. It's 3 months is about the length of the average offseason, from the end of the final up until training camp, and you throw in a development camp in there. So even that 3 months generally is a a lot busier than the past 3 months have been. So it's something everybody's has to get used to, whether you're in the hockey world or really in any industry, but especially I think for coaches, who are so used to having their time being very precious, to have this extra time is a real challenge. And in some ways it's good. They're getting to see their families more and decompress a little bit. But in another way, this is time you never get back. And it's going to be just like for players. This is going to be a real test for which coaches are able to come out of this better off than they went into.
Yeah, again, so many questions that we wish we had answers to, and plain and simple fact is we don't. So we, like everybody else, we sit back and wait and watch, and we'll see if any more headway is made in the NHL plan to return, with some other pro leagues making their comebacks in the coming weeks. And then once the NHL, I think, figures out not just the format, but how to play and how to get games finished, then we'll maybe be able to see a little bit more about how the American League might adapt to things. Although, again, they are related and very tightly connected, but still completely opposite entities when it's all said and done. They don't operate the same way by any means. And while the NHL making progress may help it, I really don't know how many questions it's going to answer for AHL fans, at least not just yet.
And how many it's going to create, right? I mean, if this starts in August, well, that creates a whole nother list of questions. If it doesn't start in August, there's a whole different list of questions that become relevant at that point. And like, you take the Ottawa Senators and Belleville Senators, they stopped playing in March. You could be looking at December, January, maybe, for them to resume play. If then, I mean, as we said earlier, we don't know for sure next season will in fact happen. And I think if we learned anything throughout this whole situation is to really, you can't count on anything until it in fact does happen. So there's a lot of really difficult, complicated questions to dig through. We're not going to try to pretend we have all the answers. We'll let you know what we know, which is not a whole lot right now. But then by the same token, I'm not sure the people who are there normally to provide the answers have the answers yet. So everybody's feeling their way through this. It's the proverbial, you wake up in the middle of the night and the lights are off and you have to reach for the light switch. And everybody's trying to do that right now, but it's a messy time. And I'm not really sure when we're going to have answers, because we're 3 months in, and I think a lot of us thought we'd be a little further ahead. In some ways we are with this, but a lot of ways, the more time goes on, the more questions arise, and you really start to sit back and think through some of the logistics of getting hockey back, or really any business back, and doing so safely. It's difficult. I come back to it's a contact sport, and you're trying to somehow have a contact sport done safely in closed quarters. You can see the potential pitfalls there. So the people that are in charge are really going to have to think this through and navigate it. And I'm not sure it's going to be very smooth, or certainly a very quick process as they go through it.
As we've said at the end of each of our last 4 shows, I think we have to wait and see. And if news breaks and there are new developments, we'll have them here for you on Around the A. Until then, we'd encourage you to head over to @AroundTheAPod on the social media, especially Twitter, and vote in our fan poll. Give us a follow. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast wherever it is you're listening to it as well. And we're always open to your feedback. We'd love to hear from you, either through those DMs on social media or by email, aroundtheapod@gmail.com. Maybe get some guest ideas, anybody that you'd really like to hear from during this slow time, and we'll see who we can track down for you in the shows ahead. That'll do it for us for now. Episode 24 in the books. For Patrick Williams, I'm David Foote, thanking you again so much for listening. Thanks again to Gerry Mayhew and to Troy Mann for their time as well on episode 24 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Thanks for listening to Around the A. Be sure to tune in again next week. Find Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Interact with us on social media. Give us your thoughts using the hashtag AroundTheA and follow us at AroundTheA Pod.